Well, first of all, the easy answer to why you need to hold it or why you should hold it is that it removes counterparty risk. And one of the truisms about gold and silver that Doug Casey made popular a long time ago is that gold and silver are assets that are not simultaneously someone else's liability. I completely and totally agree with that. In a perfect world, we would hold it all ourselves. Some people don't have that luxury, and there are storage options that make sense. In a perfect world, however, I would always hold it myself. And if that is all possible, the removal of counterparty risk to me is such that you have a far greater chance of being ripped off by the system than you do by a would-be burglar. As far as gold and silver are concerned, to me, gold is wealth. It has been wealth and silver too, but both have been wealth for 5,000 years. They've outlived hyperinflation of Germany, 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and every pandemic, and still represent pure wealth. But to me, silver is probably the most undervalued asset on the planet. And we look at that from not only its geologic relationship going back 5,000 years, but also its price relationship with gold. And it is an asset that is woefully under-owned, woefully undervalued, and has a massive expansion in industrial applications. And over the past 3 years has taken on a renaissance, if you will, in monetary demand. What really is striking to me, Jesse, is silver is stuck at around $24 an ounce, yet what we have seen over the past few years is the biggest drawdown of physical supply the world has ever seen from the exchanges. So in other words, with leverage and rhetoric, the big banks, the bullion banks, are able to suppress the price of silver, yet a country like India purchased 304 million ounces of silver last year, took possession of 300 million ounces, 304 I think is what it came out to. There's only 33 million ounces in the registered category on COMEX. That's 10 times what is backing the price-setting mechanism of the West. If you took the entire ecosystem of COMEX, all their vaults, there's less than 300 million ounces in those vaults. Of all of that silver, call it 290 million, only 33 million are bars that are available for delivery backing the contracts. So the term rehypothecation comes into play, where there are more contracts than there are bars backing it. If you look at what the London Metals Exchange just said, that if they see demand anywhere near what it was in 2022 and deliveries associated with that demand off the exchanges, there won't be any silver left in 2023. So what we are witnessing, in my opinion, is the value of a generation. However, when the music stops, if it were my choice, I would own gold, because the biggest money in the world, the central banks, the hedge funds, the sovereign wealth funds, the commercial banks, they're all accumulating gold, and I believe it will be the backing of a new system. And so, not to confuse people by saying that silver is the most undervalued asset on the planet and maybe a generational opportunity, I think the way to play it is you realize that for 5,000 years there was a 16-to-1 relationship to silver to gold. And that was geologically based, but also price-based. Even when Isaac Newton was figuring out how we should figure out gold and silver for the currencies of the Royal Mint, it was 16-to-1. If you dug a hole 5,000 years ago, 16 ounces of silver would be found for every 1 ounce of gold. And if you realize that that number has been cut in half, Keith Neumeyer will tell you that it's coming out of the ground right now globally at 7-to-1, meaning it's been cut in half. That geologic ratio for all of time was 16-to-1. Now it's 7-to-1, yet it's priced at roughly 80-to-1. There's a massive disconnection. And if you realize that since the Industrial Revolution, for about 200 years, the average price of gold to silver has been roughly 40-to-1. And that has a lot to do with logistics. But at some point, when you have an asset that has massive expansions in green and digital applications, the geologic footprint has to come into play. If it's coming out of the ground at 7-to-1, if it's priced at 80-to-1, if it's been for 5,000 years 16-to-1, and the last 200 a price, not geologic, but a price of roughly 40-to-1, we're so far out of whack it's crazy. And so it represents the value of a lifetime, in my opinion. But I think there will come a time when we trade our silver into gold, because gold is the money of the banks and the money of the kings. And I think that's where, when the music stops, you want to be. If the worst thing that happened is you own a bunch of silver, you'll be okay. But just to give people an understanding of what I really mean, In 2010, I woke up to see an 85-to-1 ratio, silver to gold. And I did a little research at that time, and geez, this is the second time in human history it's ever been this high. So I told everyone on YouTube, I started doing YouTube videos, sell your silver or your gold right now, I'll sell it to the marketplace and buy silver with it. And anyone who would have done that in theory would have got 85 pieces of silver for every 1 ounce of gold. Within 7 months in mid-2011, we saw a regression to the mean, to its average, of 37-to-1 with $50 silver and $1,915 gold. 37-to-1, 7 months later. So anyone who would have traded 1 ounce of gold for 85 pieces of silver could have traded 37 back for 1 ounce of gold, making almost 2.5 times what they started with. And I think when you talk mathematics and statistics, the further away you get from historical averages, the greater the magnetism that regresses or returns you to the mean. It's like waking up in Minneapolis, where I spent 50 years of my life, in January to 90-degree weather. I would not pull out my golf clubs and my lawn furniture. I would know it's an anomaly. And that's the same thing on a historical context, not only geologically, but also just in its price representation. Going back as far back as you can go, silver represents the opportunity of a generation. However, when the music stops, I truly do believe the place to be is gold, because it will back the next system. I think the next system that arises from this fiat system will have to be pegged to something. They'll have to have a governor. And if it's not, then no one will ever drink that Kool-Aid again. And that'll be gold. And that's why people like Jim Sinclair and Jim Rickards have said gold will go to $10,000. It'll be pegged to a new reserve standard and will never come back down. So, look, I could have $1 million worth of gold in a small briefcase and sprint out of this hotel or out of this convention center to my hotel. $1 million in silver, we'd need 6 of our friends each carrying wheelbarrows to make it out, at the same time. So
right.
I think it's gold is the place to be, but silver is the vehicle that gets you to that point.